The first time I watched a shooting for a scene in a Tagalog movie, the instruction of the director who was holding a megaphone stuck in my memory. The director said, "Lights, camera, action," in that order. I never heard him say it the other way around. He never said, "Action, camera, lights." Obviously, both the action and the reeling of the camera or the camera's film would just be wasted if the lights were not first turned on. After all, filmmaking is really photography, which comes from a Greek word photos, which means light, liwanag. What is there to capture on film if there is no light? It makes sense, therefore, why, when God created the world, the book of Genesis tells us that the very first command of God was, "Let there be light." In our gospel today, Jesus says, "You don't light a lamp and put it under a bushel basket or under a bed." Meaning, it is foolish to light a lamp and then just hide it. Rather, you put it on a lampstand so that it can carry out its purpose. And the purpose of the light is to drive away the darkness. I don't know if you're familiar with that scientific theory that was falsely attributed to Albert Einstein, that darkness does not exist by itself. It is merely the absence of the light or absence of light. And since we often use darkness as an analogy, a metaphor for evil, it makes sense also why some philosophers say evil is but the absence of good. This must have been the inspiration behind the famous quotation by Edmund Burke, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing." Well, today we celebrate the memorial of the famous Dominican saint and philosopher, Saint Thomas Aquinas. He was considered a great luminary of his time. It is not true, however, that everyone recognized the brilliance of Thomas Aquinas. His ideas were in fact condemned as heretical by the Archbishop of Paris. And it was not until around 50 years later that he was vindicated by another archbishop, also of Paris. Thomas Aquinas became notorious after he wrote his compendium of the Catholic theology, entitled the Summa Theologiae, which became very controversial because he built his theology on the foundation of the pagan philosophy of Aristotle. St. Thomas dared to adopt the ideas of Aristotle in the service of Christian theology. Unfortunately, he left his work unfinished, hindi natapos. He moved to another Dominican house of studies in Naples, in Italy, in 1273. Well, I hear na ginawa yun ng superior just to get him away from controversy in Paris. In the language of the gospel today, maybe we can call that an effort to hide this bright light under a bushel basket. But instead of succeeding in suppressing the brilliant ideas of Thomas, the authorities only made his philosophy even more appealing, such that his name became practically associated with a whole philosophical discipline called Thomism. Imagine how this brilliant man suddenly just stopped teaching and writing one day. He just withdrew from the academic limelight and remained in obscurity until the day he died at the age of 49. You know, he had a secretary by the name of Brother Reginald. And Brother Reginald, his friend and secretary, narrated that St. Thomas had a kind of religious experience on the feast day of St. Nicholas in the year 1273. Apparently, he was celebrating Mass. And while celebrating Mass, he received a revelation that had such a profound impact on Thomas. Brother Reginald tried to persuade him to go back to writing and teaching and to finish his theological project. And you know what Thomas Aquinas said? He said, "The end of my labors has come. After the things that have been revealed to me, I feel I can write no more. I have seen things that made my writings seem like straw." Ang mga sinulat daw niya, parang dayami. The better image that I can think of is the irrelevance of a lighted candle under a blazing sunlight. And it is probably also what John the Baptist felt in the presence of Jesus. He was a lamp burning brightly, and people rejoiced in his light. But John himself kept calling attention to a greater light, which is the testimony of Jesus. And he said, "This is a testimony greater than mine." In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." And so he tells his disciples, "Therefore, you must let your light shine before people so that they may see your good works and give glory to God, the Father in heaven." So, how can we call ourselves Christians if we become comfortable with the darkness of lies, falsehood, and ignorance? There was a Nazi propagandist, Joseph Goebbels, who once said, "To turn a lie into a truth, all you need to do is to keep repeating it." Sa kauulit daw ng kasinungalingan, ito'y nagiging katotohanan. According to the propagandist, it is supposed to be the basic rule of propaganda in the negative sense. And it seems to be also one of the basic principles being followed by the propagandists in the use of the social media nowadays. I am sure St. Paul was already aware of this evil strategy even in his own time. That is why he ends his letter, which we read in our first reading today, by saying, we must consider how to rouse one another to love and good works. We should not stay away from our gatherings. Instead, we must encourage one another. And this, he says, all the more as you see the day drawing near.